The first duty of government is to protect our rights.
It's our job to maintain the proper role of government and what we were tasked to do.
In the Idaho Constitution, Article 1, Section 1, we have a right to life, we have a right to defend life.
This legislation is centered on meeting the needs of Idaho families.
And we have no way to maintain control over the spending of this program, and it will be a disaster for this state long term.
But we have a whole gamut of kids whose parents would like to do something for them and they cannot.
The courts have long held that our ability to transfer title on real property benefits society as a whole.
This is simply about putting it out of reach of young, innocent, vulnerable children and making our libraries and schools a safe place for them to go.
And I am increasingly frustrated that we cannot stop ourselves from drinking at the public trough.
He's sounding the alarm. He's saying if we don't address these issues, we potentially might have greater problems moving forward.
I feel like we're back to an unappointed board that gets to decide who is essential and who is non-essential.
If I was looking at a business and I was looking at these figures, there would be heads rolling because this is unsustainable.
We're supposed to be bottom-up government. We're supposed to be representing my citizens' ideas and your citizens' ideas, and we're supposed to be discussing them and debating them to come to a conclusion.
And for me, it's about a couple things. It's about food security, it's about national security, and it's about preserving American exceptionalism.
The First Amendment and our freedom of religion, freedom of speech are our first liberties. They are so important. We don't have the rest without them.
Welcome. Good morning, everybody. 11:32 in the south, 10:32 up north. My name is Matt Edwards. Welcome to Idaho Signal, March 26, 2024. The House of Representatives down in Boise is live. They have been flying through the second reading calendar, so which means that they are ahead of schedule because they're not waiting another day for all the bills on the second reading calendar to move to the third reading calendar when they normally debate and then vote on bills. It looks like Representative Jordan Redmond is presenting here. Let's listen in a little bit to Representative Redmond.
You've heard the motions for debate on the motion. Hearing none, hearing no negative debate. And since this does not require, the debate is closed, since this proclamation does not require any, there'll be a roll call vote without an objection. A voice vote, excuse me. A voice vote without objection, hearing none. All those in favor of the proclamation say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Motion passes, and the proclamation is passed the House. Correction title.
Okay, I'll tell you what they just voted on. This was just a proclamation commending Douglas Robert Gwynn for his service to the United States as a high-speed radio operator during World War II. So that's very nice that they're doing that. And as they move along here, they've got some concurrent resolutions coming up. But earlier this morning, or just before we went on, the House did pass House Bill H-572 as amended in the Senate. This deals with the universal basic income. So this was Representative Dale Hawkins had brought this forward that recognized that certain cities and states across our country have been just dishing out money to people for no reason other than them being alive. So it's called universal basic income. And this thing is trying to take a hold across our country. And so Representative Dale Hawkins said, no, we are not just going to be giving people money for no reason here in Idaho. So they passed it in the House. It went over to the Senate. They adjusted some language. Then they voted on it, brought it back to the House, and Hawkins was all on board with their changes. And so now that bill will move on to the governor's desk. They're also, just before we went on the air, Representative Joe Alfieri, who we had on yesterday discussing election issues. And there, if you did not watch yesterday or you haven't been on X to see the footage or subscribe to our Rumble channel to see some of the bombshells that were dropped yesterday during a committee hearing on another bill, not the bill that we're about to show you here, but on another bill. The allegation, or not the allegation, I mean, it's what happened. I can't call them an allegation. This is what happened, where there were photocopied ballots being run through machines during a logic and accuracy test in Canyon County. They were testing the machines, putting in real ballots to see if you know that everything was working correctly, and then somebody said, "What happens if we put a photocopy of a ballot through the machine? What happens there?" And apparently, the machine accepted it as if it was a real ballot. So that made its way into the committee yesterday. You see our good friend there, Ms. Arnold, I believe her name was Jody Arnold, was talking about this. Representative Joe Alfieri brought this topic up with Secretary of State Phil McGrain, who was presenting his own bill, and then there's the secretary there, and then he brought up another issue in Fremont County where the poll books that are used to sign people in when you're voting, that they were loaded up with, not with the primary registry, but they were loaded up with the general registry. So people who were showing up to vote during a Republican or the Democrat primary, any of these primaries, I mean, the Republicans are the ones that have a closed primary. So people that were showing up to vote in the Republican primary last year, or last election, were signing in using an open database, the general database. So that was very concerning. And so that was we played that footage yesterday of Joe Alfieri talking with Phil about those things. So it's because of those things that Representative Joe Alfieri presented House Bill 470, which created an elections crime unit in the Attorney General's office. And so that went through committee. We played some clips from when he went through committee. This morning, just now, he was live on the floor with his opening debate on this bill. So let's cut to that. This just happened moments ago on the House floor.
During Monday's House State Affairs Committee, in discussing Senate Bill 1384, we heard testimony that during the testing of Canyon County Central and Precinct ballot scanners in October of 2023, photocopies of ballots were run through the equipment, which should have caused a failure in the logic and accuracy test. It did not. And that equipment was used during the election, even though they logically failed the test. This is something that should have been reported and investigated. We don't know what the reasoning was. We don't know why that happened, but it's certainly something that should have been looked into. And this is something that this office would be able to look into. That's why we need this legislation. And I will remind this body that we recently approved an ombudsman in a different department to look into similar issues, to take care of any issue that might arise within a different department. And based on that, I would ask for your green light on this. And I will stand for questions if necessary, but there won't be any.
Okay, well, there was a question from Representative Britt Raybould, who used the old, in her questioning, she asked something to the effect of, so have there been any instances that have happened that haven't been investigated by the Secretary of State's office? And she was kind of saying, like, why do we need to create this under a completely different office? And so we heard the argument, we heard these types of arguments during committee in this hearing, where Joe Alfieri used the example that when a bank is robbed, you call the police. You don't just let the bank managers investigate the crime. They can be helpful, they can add a lot of value, but if there's a crime happening, you want to get the people who investigate crimes to look into it. So this bill had very little debate. I think that was, if I'm correct, that might have been one of two. Maybe somebody else debated it. But Joe Alfieri closed the debate on this, and then it went to the floor to the entire House to pass. And funny enough, it was one of those close. Yeah, go ahead full screen on that. That was a close. It was a close vote there. 34 ayes, 36 nays, and the usual suspects voting along with Democrats here to kill a bill that would establish an Office of Election Crimes and Security. It fails in the House, and so. No problem here, even though we've highlighted, just right now, we've highlighted for you, and Representative Alfieri highlighted for you, we did so yesterday, that everything's fine. Everything's fine. We don't need the Attorney General. We don't need a special person to look into these kinds of crimes. It's just our elections. It's just our elections, which are about to happen in 2 months from now, in less than 2 months from now. We're about to have our primary, right? But, machines can just, have photocopies go through this machines. We can just, put up different poll books. It's fine. It's fine. It's not happening in Idaho. We're talking about Michigan. Did I preface this? This is all about Michigan. This is all about Michigan. No, of course not. It's not about Michigan. It's about Idaho. Things are happening here. Unbelievable. Okay, before I get fired up, some other things were happening this morning. So that's what happened in the House. Some other things were happening this morning in the committee, which we thought were interesting. There was an exchange in the House Education Committee, which we have not checked in on a lot this session. But we checked in today. Our fearless producer was in the House Education Committee this morning, and he caught this exchange on a bill that deals with how funding would go if our public schools would go to a 4-day a week instead of 5 days. Did you guys know that the public schools are considering going to 4 days a week? What do you think about that? Let's watch this exchange.
I'm not sure what this fixes. I'm not sure what problem we originally set out to fix and how this fixes that. I'm struggling with this internally, and I don't know which of the first two motions I'll vote for.
Representative Ehart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Committee and those in the audience, let's think about this. We've brought legislation in the past that has to do with property tax relief. It's been worked on all session. We've been invited through the years to attend those sessions, work sessions, which I did. So I was aware of what was happening. But what happens is then it's released at the end. And what are we accused of? Last minute budgeting property taxes. Last minute. Even though it wasn't last minute, it was worked on all session. It was worked on before the session began. So what did we do this year with leadership on both sides and with the governor? We brought it early. We brought it early so everybody could look at it. And if there were problems, we'd still have time to address it. What have we just done? We addressed it. And now we're complaining because we addressed it? People, let's move this forward with a due pass recommendation because we've done exactly what we've been asked to do.
Madam Chair, objection.
Yes. Is the tone, the tenor of the
tone, and with the specific use of the word complain, I'm not sure me doing my due diligence on behalf of
Madam
the residents
Chair,
of District 19.
Let him speak.
I do not believe me, in a measured tone, doing my due diligence on behalf of the residents of District 19 is complaining, and I take particular offense to that suggestion.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Ehart, take a breath.
No, Madam Chair, you're fine. Listen, when I said complain, there was nothing directed at the good colleague.
But he took it that way.
He shouldn't have. Because if we've been listening through the years, what did I talk about? What has the outside our constituents been doing? They've been complaining. That was no reference to anyone in here. It was to everyone that said, we brought it last minute. So I'm saying we didn't bring it last minute.
Well, Representative Ehart, I appreciate that, but perception is reality. And I have to say, I felt like it was directed that way too. And you are a very passionate person. You're courtside manner, so we get it. But I would just ask you take a breath.
Madam Chairman, please let's not go there. That's not.
Representative Ehart.
Madam Chair.
When I ask you to take a breath and calm down, that's exactly what I mean.
Madam Chair, please. That's patronizing. Okay?
Well,
That's
we're
patronizing.
all sitting here
I was
listening.
talking about all of the people through all these years that have been complaining because we bring legislation in their eyes last minute. This was brought early.
And we heard what you said. Thank you. Representative Gardner.
Woo! Where's my popcorn? Holy cow, that was intense. Unreal. So that is chairwoman of the committee there, Representative Julie Yamamoto, completely patronizing Representative Ehart. Are you kidding me? Wow. You know, some people who, you know, that principle, that teacher mentality has never left Representative Yamamoto. What gall she has to try and control somebody's emotions like that. I mean, you can sit there and say, "Hey, let's calm down on the tone," but then to go in on like, take a breath, go sit in the corner, like, wow, incredible. You know, good for Representative Ehart, and everybody knows Representative. I mean, that's incredible. That's incredible. She works hard. She's one of the hardest working legislators there. And for the woman doesn't sleep. It's incredible that when she brings up a complaint like that, or I mean, was it a complaint? I mean, she was just trying to keep everybody abreast as to how the process worked, and I didn't find her tone to be anything different, but. Boy, that certainly was interesting. You could tell it's the end of the session, and tensions are high. But shame on Julie Yamamoto. Wow, I mean, so condescending. I mean, boy, that was incredible. But elections are coming, folks. Elections are coming. There can be some changes. Okay, we have invited Brian Allman on the program. He will join us here in a few minutes. But also, one quick thing that also happened this morning was over in the Senate State Affairs Committee. Real quick backstory here. So yesterday, I think it was yesterday, Governor Brad Little signed this DEI bill that we talked about last week, which no longer requires, or it basically prohibits employers, government employees, employers from requiring a diversity statement when getting hired. And so if you're applying for a job, you are no longer required, or the state of Idaho will not require you. They're barred from requiring a diversity statement. And so that bill was signed. But there's another bill. There's another bill that Senator Brian Lenny has been trying to get heard, which would completely dismantle all of the funding, all of the stuff that is going through our colleges right now when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, these DEI stuff. And this bill is not going to be heard. I think I have the bill number here somewhere because I got it. We're gonna go over all this stuff of things that are being left behind, but it's not being heard in the Senate State Affairs Committee. I don't have the exact number here yet right now, but we'll get it. And so this morning, Senator Winder in the talk about last minute, introduced an RS, which means this doesn't even have a bill number. This is a brand new idea. And he presented it this morning in the Senate State Affairs Committee. So let's listen to his reasoning on this bill this morning.
Senator, with RS 31735, Senator Winder, and you can present from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly, we've had a lot of discussion about DEI and the impacts it has on our higher education institutions, and I think it's time we actually gather some facts, and so that's what this resolution would do. It would allow for a interim committee made up of House and Senate members, potential for non-legislative members to be appointed as ex officio members with non-voting rights. Fiscal notes about $10,000 to cover travel expenses for members of that interim committee. I think this would be a great way to move forward and again, gather the facts on this issue before anything's done.
Okay, so Senator Melissa Wintrow, oh boy, took issue here with the government getting too involved. Listen to this.
Senator Winder talked about hoping to get the facts about diversity, equity, and inclusion. My guess is that we're going to actually see the positive impacts of creating inclusive environments on our college campuses and making sure everybody fits in and belongs, especially folks who've been marginalized historically and for a long period of time. I think the tone and tenor of the resolution, however, is slanted and is skewed negatively, and it almost feels like we're on a witch hunt. And I remember a certain CRT committee that was held one summer that didn't go very far and caused a lot of angst. So I'm really questionable about the government trying to involve itself in this aspect. So I can't support the introduction of this bill unless it really is a more neutral stance of how is this impacting the positives as well.
Okay, so there you have it. What I find fascinating here is that, like I said, the bill number that would really do a number on this DEI nonsense is Senate Bill 1357, dealing with the funding of all of these things. And that bill, as Senator Lenny has been very public about, is being held, and it's being held in the Senate State Affairs Committee. It's not even getting a hearing, but in order to kind of say, well, we should probably look into all this stuff, Senator Winder is presenting the idea that we should have a task force to look into all this, when all he really has to do is look at the news and then also look at this bill, Senate Bill 1357, to figure out exactly what's going on. But he wants to do a task force, and Senator Wintrow doesn't think there needs to be a task force. So the bill is going to get printed. We'll see if it gets hearing and crossed over and made in time. But that's the state of affairs. That's politics. We're heading into election season, and there's going to be a lot of shade throwing around for people's actions. So that's where we have. All right. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Brian Allman from the Gem State Chronicle will join us. Everybody's favorite Brian. Outside of Brian Lenny, I don't know. Who's your favorite Brian? Do we need to run a poll? I don't know. We'll be right back.
It's our job to maintain the proper role of government and what we were tasked to do.
All Idaho lawmakers swear an oath to support the Idaho and U.S. constitutions. But how's that working out for you? Because not all Idaho lawmakers share the same values. That's where the Citizens Alliance of Idaho Pledge comes in. 10 statements inspired by those two founding documents that are designed to preserve our shared values. Values such as education freedom, safeguarding free speech, defending our protected right to self-defense, and being responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. When a lawmaker signs the pledge, they are performing an act of political courage, accepting the challenge to be a champion for our values, and serving with political integrity. To find out if your lawmaker signed the pledge, visit idahopledge.com. Paid for by Citizens Alliance of Idaho. We ride together.
Okay, we are back. Right now, the House is voting on Senate Bill 1293 as amended in the House. So that's 1293AAAAH. That's what happened when bills get bounced around. It passes here. This bill repeals and adds to existing law to establish provisions regarding annexation of land by cities. So if you are someone who's really into the local politics and local ongoings about what goes on in your city, that's a bill that might affect you when it comes to annexation of lands, especially in areas of large growth in our state, which I know a lot of us live in those areas of growth. So, all right, let's bring on Brian Allman here joining us this morning. Brian, we're going to get into this here today. Welcome to the program. We're anticipating this to be the final week of the session. There are bills that are, like I said, the House has been flying through some bills this morning. The Senate was at ease the last time I checked. But I wanted to kind of get your perspective on bills that have gone through, bills that have failed, bills that are stalled, and where you think we're going. I have my list here. It's all highlighted with where things are. But if there's some place you'd rather start, I want to kick it over to you, sir.
Oh, hello, Matt.
Thanks for having me here. Once again, it's been a great program this year, keeping people informed about what's going on in the session. I think, for too long and for too many people, the session, it's just this thing that happens, and you might hear one or two things if you open up the newspaper or turn on the evening news, but it's not really that important. But I think the last few years have proven that it is important, especially as, we have, I think, a left-wing agenda throughout the country that is moving to rapidly transform our country. And you've got conservatives trying to stand up and stop that, and others who are saying it's not really happening. And our state legislatures are at the front lines of that. So what happens here really, really makes a difference, much more than, it's easy to get caught up in the national news, who's the president, who's running, who's the Speaker of the House this week. But really, that has a much less impact on your life than what happens in the Capitol in Boise. So I think it's good that people are starting to pay attention. I think programs like yours are great, and I'm trying to do my best to keep people informed. I started at the beginning of the session this thing I called the Session Snapshot over at the Gem State Chronicle. I was keeping track of all the bills, showing you where they are, doing a write-up. If I watched the committee, I'd write up exactly what was happening. If you go up to the top, there's a link to it. Eventually, I just ran out of time. Right around the beginning of March, every committee had about 10 different RSs that were being introduced all at the same time for several days at a time. And there were just too many bills. So if I ever do this again, I'm going to need a team of interns to keep up on it. But it has been interesting. And so you can see now with the graphics which bills have been killed. They have the little red dot. Which ones have been signed. They're fully green across the board. And which ones are stuck. The ones that have their green lines are about halfway there. They're stuck in a committee or on the floor. And anything that's still stuck in committee right now, I assume, is going to die because leadership obviously didn't want it to go through. Ron Nate over at the Freedom Foundation wrote an article just this week looking at all the bills that Senator Jim Guthrie, the chairman of Senate State Affairs, has blocked so far. And there's like a dozen different bills that are sitting in his drawer in Senate State Affairs that simply haven't gotten a hearing. And some of them are okay bills. Some of them are great bills, like Brian Lenny's DEI bill. And they're just stuck there. I remember 2 years ago when I first started paying attention to the legislature, the chairman of Senate State Affairs then was Senator Patty Ann Lodge. And she was doing the same thing. She would stuff bills in her drawer, and even good stuff that came from the House Bill 666, removing the exception that allows librarians and teachers to give obscene materials to children, that passed the House overwhelmingly, and then it got stuck in her drawer. Even people like Julie Yamamoto and Lori McCann from House Education, they voted for that, which tells me that they probably knew that the fix was in, that it was never going to go anywhere in the Senate. So you can see how these committee chairs use their power to put their thumbs on the scales here during the session.
Yeah, Brian, let me stop you there real quick, because you're exactly right, and that is a point I definitely want to get to about the power that these committee chairs hold, for better or for worse. Because when you look at the House side, you could say, well, Brent Crane, the chairman of the House State Affairs Committee, is holding some bad bills that we don't like. But for better or for worse, it's a power that is very that it's not going anywhere. So we can't talk about that in a moment, but I want to go back to to the Senate State Affairs, because that's exactly the biggest problem in Idaho right now. And so you pointed out a couple of bills that are starting on the Senate and haven't crossed over. But how about some of the great bills that have crossed over from the House, Brian? I mean, we're looking at bills like the mask mandate bill, the concealed weapons on school property bill. These bills passed the House with a great majority and sit in the Senate State Affairs Committee. Ballot harvesting prohibited. The Traditional Values Month. That's just a resolution. That's not even a law. I mean, these things are not even getting a hearing. And there might be a couple in here that did get a hearing, but then they got killed. They said they weren't going to pass them in the Senate, even though they passed overwhelmingly in the House. What sticks out to you from the House side that is sitting in Senate State Affairs that you think we should be focused on, or if there's any last-minute push here in this final week?
No, let's see. Well, there's Representative Young's bill defining male and female seems pretty straightforward. The Democrats hate it, but is that a reason for the Republican chairman of the Senate State Affairs to hold it and not let it go through? So sometimes it seems, you've got, call them extremes, just the margins, the most conservative people on the right and the most liberal people on the left. Is probably the Idaho Freedom Caucus Republicans on the right and the Democrats on the left. And it seems like some of these committee chairs and these people in leadership, they're more worried about what the leftists think of them than what the conservatives think of them. And it tells you, I think, where some of their loyalties lie. I'm trying to find some of them over here.
Well, I've got a few. House, like I said, House Bill 415, the enhanced carry permit holders who work on schools would be allowed to carry weapons. Guthrie tried to have a substitute bill on that, which was denied. And so that they know that there is demand for this. The NRA was behind this bill. So that bill is not going anywhere soon, it doesn't seem like. The compelled speech, House Bill 538, that might get a hearing this week, but that's a huge issue. That's a huge First Amendment issue. Have you heard any rumblings about any of these bills, like this compelled speech one, 538?
I haven't heard anything. It's just been stuck in there, and that's another one where the Democrats really hate it. And for some reason, I don't know. Maybe there are enough moderate Republicans out there who really want to vote against this, but they're afraid of what it would look like to their constituents to go home to Eastern Idaho and tell their voters that yes, I protected the right of people to demand to be called by different pronouns, and they don't want to have to do that. So, perhaps Chairman Guthrie's just doing them all a favor by not letting it see the light of day.
I was at an event last night. I spoke with some young folks who they gather monthly for political purposes to discuss politics, to share stories of in their they're all like-minded young folks that gather. And I was asked to come in and speak last night, and one of the people there, she was 15 years old, and she was talking about at her high school that 5 teachers, and this is just her reporting, this 15-year-old's reporting, that 5 teachers have left or quit their jobs or have moved their jobs, whatever, something, because they are being forced to use pronouns that they don't believe in, or they're forced to, and I'm not just saying calling a girl a boy or a boy a girl, but calling somebody a cat. I mean, she was talking about this furry that brings a litter box to school. And I know this is an urban legend, that there's litter boxes in schools. And I never considered the fact that maybe the students themselves would bring their own litter boxes, that schools weren't supplying them. But this is all, again, this is from a 15-year-old's mouth. And I told her, I said, I need proof. I need, so she's got to find a way to do that. So she's now it's public. It's on record. That being said, though, these are a real problem, and they affect real people's lives, and they really upset the apple cart when it comes to having a civil society where we're being crazed with our minds to shift all of the rules of grammar in order to satisfy somebody's feelings. And so that, to me, that bill is extremely important. Why can't these things get a hearing, Brian? I mean, you've been looking at the state across the board when it comes to how the factions are forming, and these Main Street caucus people seem to just be deferring to this radical left ideology that the Democrats permeate throughout the Capitol.
Well, what I think is happening from a very big picture level is you have a lot of us thought that they would try and go more conservative this year since it's an election year. And that's always what Republicans try to do, move to the right for the primary in an election year and then go back to business as usual. But this year, they haven't really done that. They've gone the other direction. And so I think what's happened is that I think the so-called Main Street caucus, the moderate Republicans, the liberal Republicans, they saw the growing power of the Idaho Freedom Caucus that was coalescing around more conservative principles and working as a bloc to try and promote those principles. And so I think, this is just my speculation, I think that the Main Street Caucus made some sort of secret deal, whether spoken or unspoken, with the Democrats. Because there's not many Democrats in the legislature. There's 8 in the Senate and 11 in the House. But you take that number, add it to the Main Street Caucus, and you've got a pretty sizable chunk. And I think there has been some vote trading going on. You saw all the Republicans, all the Main Street Republicans line up behind Senator Wintrow's bill to force insurance providers to carry to reimburse 6 months of contraception. They were all too happy to do that. And then some of the Democrats have flipped and supported some, of the Main Street Caucus bill. So I think there's a secret alliance there, a kind of a Molotov-Ribbentrop pact, if you want to go there, between the left-wing Republicans and the Democrats to shut out the conservative Republicans. It's not about the issues; it's about maintaining their power, and this is a path they see forward that to keep their power in the legislature.
Well, and these people need to be called out for it, and I thank you for doing your part in calling people out for it. We see it, we see that happening throughout some of the chatter out on social media and stuff. But so I hope we can keep that stuff up. Okay, a couple other important bills that I think folks should know about that appear to be stalled. One of them is House Bill 525, which is in the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. If you pull that one up, that deals with the health boards, limiting the health boards, and I believe that got voted down in committee.
Yes, I was in the room for that one.
Yeah, talk to us about that, and because this is again, it passed in the House. What's going on?
Yeah, it passed almost on a party line. Only one Republican voted against it. A couple of Republicans voted against it in the House. Dustin Manwaring, Clay Handy. But it came over to the Senate Health and Welfare Committee, and Senator Brian Lenny presented it, and they shut it down. Abby Lee voted against it and debated against it. I think that there was probably, this is actually the incident that inspired me to write the article about how politics is more like Mean Girls than anything else, because I think there's just some personal animosity toward Brian Lenny from fellow senators, and so they saw an opportunity to kill a bill he was carrying, and so they did it. And in the meantime, it helped solidify that alliance, potential alliance.
Despicable, despicable, Brian. Come on. Yep. I mean, we're talking about a bill that passed, and you're right, it passed 58-12 in the House, and the only two Republicans that voted for it were Clay Handy and Dustin Manwaring, just confirming. Clay Handy and Dustin Manwaring. And then it goes to a completely Republican-controlled committee. Completely controlled Republican committee, where it gets, you're saying, it dies most likely because people don't like Brian Lenny.
Yep.
And this
Senator Abby Lee joined with the Democrats, Melissa Wintrow and Ron Taylor, to vote no.
Right. Unbelievable.
And remember, Senator Lee is not running for re-election. So I think she's I think she's either just on a kind of a revenge tour, or she's just showing her true colors. If you check her, last I checked, her Freedom Index score was something like 25%, something ridiculously low for a Republican. So now that she doesn't have to go back to her voters in District 9 and say, ask for their vote, she's, basically caucusing with the Democrats almost.
Yeah, she can do whatever she wants. And just to clarify, all that bill did was say that health districts should the language in the law would be to remove the word all and substitute it with reasonable and necessary. Right? It was remove all, replace with reasonable and necessary when it comes to making recommendations on health restrictions on the public. So things like mask mandates or social distancing or stay home or whatever happened during COVID that was completely outrageous. All this bill wanted to do was to say to the health districts, you can't just say all. You can't do all things. You can do reasonable things. And then let them interpret what that is, and then we'll take it from there. But to just say all is what got us in the mess last time. So it was a reasonable bill. Yeah,
and that's why I think there must have been maybe some personal animosity there. But there's a
Yeah.
lot of what seem to be reasonable bills that are being killed or being just stuffed in the drawer. Speaking of mask mandates, there's Senator Lee sitting down at 25%, hanging out with the Democrats. She's flanked by two Democrats there.
Right. Incredible. That's the Idaho Freedom Foundation's Freedom Index. Well, they do 3 different measurements now. They do the education, freedom, and spending, and that's pretty lousy when it comes to freedom.
Yeah, the education index there, that can be a bit of an outlier just because they've only put a handful of bills on the education index. So it's I don't think it's as valuable as the other 2 indices because there might be only 2 bills that are on it. So you vote for one and vote against the other and whatever. But you see her scores are pretty low. She's perhaps returning to her foundational principles there. Hopefully that seat gets an upgrade. But you mentioned mask mandates. A bill to ban cities from imposing mask mandates or any courthouses or any other government office. It passed the House 46-24, and it's sitting in Jim Guthrie's drawer. It's not getting a hearing, and that's that really is the most frustrating thing because all these committee chairs, they're appointed by the pro tem, and I think the lieutenant governor gives some input. I don't know exactly what the balance there is, but they're appointed by leadership, and leadership is voted on by the body. So, really what you need is, you need to come back next year with enough conservative senators that they can elect new leadership who can then put in committee chairs who aren't going to just put things in their drawers to keep good legislation from going through. I mean, it's one thing if it's a bill that was just introduced, say on the Senate side, and maybe the chair doesn't think it's ready or doesn't think it's going to pass. That's one thing. But if it comes from the other chamber and it passed, that's where I think there ought to be a rule that says if it already passed the other chamber, then it has to at least have a hearing in the committee. Maybe it fails the committee. Maybe the committee votes it down. That would be fine. But at least give it a public hearing.
Yeah, I agree, Brian. Okay, we've added music to our programming here, so that if you've heard that, you don't get distracted by it. That just means we're going to go to a quick break. Brian, can you stick around for another segment?
Sure.
Okay, great. All right, folks, we'll be right back after this.
Spending this money surplus, which is not a surplus, it's an overcharging of the taxpayers.
The dictionary defines a pledge as something that you give as a sign that you'll keep a promise. As Idahoans, that's what we're looking for in our elected leaders, a sign that they'll keep their word. Talk is cheap, and so are political promises, hidden agendas, and special interests. This is why we created the Citizens Alliance of Idaho Pledge, affirming the values Idahoans have been living by for over 100 years. Inspired by the only 2 documents everyone has agreed to live by. So when an Idaho legislator signs our pledge, inviting voters to publicly hold them accountable, that's what we call political integrity. The pledge restores trust and honesty between voters and their legislators. It means protecting our shared values and ensuring your voice is heard in Boise. And that is priceless. Thank your legislator for having the political courage to sign the Citizens Alliance of Idaho Pledge. And if they haven't, it's time to ask why.
Okay, welcome back. We are here still with Brian Allman, Gem State Chronicle, and we are gearing up. It appears that they're trying to wrap up the legislative session by the end of this week. And so we wanted to get everybody up to speed on some of the bills that have stalled, some that have passed, and so forth. Brian, not to put you on the spot here again, but it just occurred to me, what are some of the good wins that happened with with some of the bills? Do you have any ones that have crossed the line that were good? I mean, I feel like there's definitely has been a couple. I mean, they passed the UBI this morning, banning UBI. That'll go to the governor's desk, as well as the governor signed the no public funds for transgender. I believe he signed that. No public funds for transgender surgeries. Any other wins that you could see from this legislative session so far? Even if they're not bills, maybe they're processes or whatnot?
Well, I don't think he signed the gender transition one yet. However, I assume he will because last year after they passed the bill banning child gender transition, the governor actually sent a letter to IDHW telling them that public funds should not be used for this. So I assume he's on board with that. The needle exchange repeal went through and was signed. A couple of years ago, the legislature decided, okay, well, we'll give some money to these harm reduction, nonprofits that try and help people who are on drugs by giving them, well, essentially drug paraphernalia, by giving them a safe place to shoot up and, swapping their needles and everything else. I don't know specifically which ones do which thing, but that's the idea. And well, it turned out that enabling drug use does not actually help, people get off drugs. And in fact, it was just encouraging more of it. The Boise police raided the harm reduction place in Boise and found drug paraphernalia that they were handing out. And so they shut it down and they've repealed the law. They're probably going to try and come back next year, but we can have that debate at that time. So
yeah. And what was fascinating on a political level here, and you can see Representative Blanksma, heading the charge to repeal this law that she led 5 years ago, getting implemented. It feels like she's trying to clean up her mess, which is good. I mean, it is a mess, as you just described. But this is that slippery slope that people, I'm sure if we went back in the archive, it'd be interesting to go back and watch the hearings and watch some of the people debate this bill of whether they thought where this thing was headed. Because looking at states and cities like Portland and Oregon and Los Angeles and New York City, Chicago, any large city where they do these needle exchange programs, it doesn't fare so well. I mean, they can bring out the data and say, oh, it reduces syphilis or it reduces AIDS and that sort of thing, but it certainly appears to add way more drug problems, drug issues, users issues.
Yeah, it really is a sign of where our society is. We're kind of at a very sick and decaying place, but that's a whole nother topic. If we're talking about good news,
yes,
Senator Herndon, remember he had the lawsuit against the city of Sandpoint because they leased out a public area to a private entity for an event, and then that private entity refused to allow them to carry guns. And the Supreme Court upheld that, saying, well, the law doesn't say that you can't do that. So, well, they pushed through a law now, and that passed, and it's awaiting the governor's signature, last I checked, that would say if you're a public, you have a public area, such as a public park or a public street, and it's opened up for an event, and it's a private entity running the event, they can't ban guns unless, there's a carve out there, unless it's a restricted entry event, such as you have to show a ticket or they only let in adults or something. If they restrict entry, then they can still ban guns, but if it's just a public event, they can't.
Yeah, like an art show or a farmer's market or something that just allows people to come and go as they please. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, that is a huge win. I know that was at top of mind. It was one of the first bills that Senator Herndon introduced this session. It went through a couple of different iterations, I think, and it may have been amended or brought back a couple of different ways, but he seems happy with it. I know the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance was all for it. We had Greg Pruitt on early in the session as well to talk about this from the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance, as well as Senator Christy Zito. So yeah, this was a big win. Very good win on that side. Thanks for bringing that up. Okay, I wanted to get your perspective on the bombshells that came to a front yesterday during a hearing in the Senate State Affairs Committee on elections, and Senator Phil McGrain there was there with a bill to kind of strengthen the logic and accuracy testing of voting equipment. And discussion kind of turned to some events that happened that were reported in the news back in October, late October, early November of last year when they were doing testing down in Canyon County. They went through and did photocopies through the machine in Canyon County, and they weren't rejected. They were accepted as if they were real ballots. Another bombshell, and that's the first bombshell. The other bombshell was apparently, and this is the first time I heard it, so I'm still learning the facts of this and the fallout. Over in Fremont County, the e-poll books that everybody signs in on, when you show up to vote, you sign in on a tablet and show your ID. That poll book should have been, at this particular election, it should have been loaded with the rolls for a primary election, so a restricted, Republicans only type of roster. Well, apparently the general roster was uploaded to the e-poll book, and so you had Democrats voting, registered Democrats voting in a Republican primary, and it wasn't caught until after the fact. And again, we're still learning the details on this. But apparently that happened, and not nefariously. It was apparently done by mistake. It was done before Phil McGrain was even in office. And guys, do we have that clip where he talks about it? Okay, let's watch this real quick. Do you mind, Brian? Let's watch it.
Questions for you. To Jody's question, the e-poll book audit, why is that not included in this legislation?
Mr. Chairman, really because this chapter and section relates to voting equipment. It doesn't relate to the e-poll books. And so not to say there isn't merit for us to look at how we do that. We do test the e-poll books, but it's not as clearly defined as it is for the voting equipment. I welcome a further conversation on e-poll books.
So maybe legislation coming in the future. Second question is the issue that she raised versus the Democrats voting and the Republicans. I'm sure you're familiar with that issue. Did your office get involved in that? Did you do an investigation? And if so, what was the results?
Mr. Chairman, the issue that she specifically referred to, I am familiar with it. It was under Secretary Denny that it occurred. So I'm familiar with it on the back end, just like Ms. Arnold is. The issue was there was an error in the May primary in 2022 in Fremont County. And I think it was the certification of candidates is where the original error occurred. But it was close enough. Fremont County is a very small county. So the results were close enough that a new election was ordered to happen in August. And so the specific issue was the e-poll book had not been set up for a primary election because it was an August election when it should have been. And so that's at the core of the problem. I know that election was scrutinized closely after the fact, but it shouldn't have happened, in all honesty. So I'm familiar with it and have used that as a learning lesson as we move forward.
Good. Thank you.
So I'm still a little vague on what happened there, but for whether it was nefarious or whether it was a mistake, the wrong information was uploaded into the poll book there. What's your take, Brian?
Well, I don't know much about that second incident with Democrats voting as Republicans. I know that's an issue that the Republican Party is very concerned with because it does happen. But it sounds like it was just a mistake that county clerk's office, they were supposed to redo a primary, but usually in August, it's not a primary. When they had August elections, it was just an open election that anyone could vote in. And so they programmed it wrong. In my experience here in Ada County as a poll worker, and I was a chief judge last year, we go through training. We learn how to use the poll books, and we learn how to manage the vote counting machine. You fill out the paper ballot with filling in the circles, and then you feed it through the machine. It counts it with the optical scanner. And each one, there's supposed to be numerous levels of accountability. When we open up the e-poll books, we can't, as poll workers, can't actually do anything. It's all programmed at the clerk's office, and we're locked out. And so we can just open it up and look it up. We can't register to people to vote there or change their affiliation if they fill out the proper forms. It sounded like that was probably just an error, and hopefully, as Secretary McGrain says, hopefully they are learning from it and using it to keep that from happening.
But errors don't happen in Idaho. We don't have errors here. We don't have errors.
There's always errors, and the question is, because this is really a complicated system. We have 2 million people in the state, however many registered voters. We need to give them the proper ballot, or first we have to make sure that they're actually registered to vote. And then we have to give them the proper ballot. Sometimes it's really easy. It's just a single ballot. But other times, let's say you're doing a primary that also has a that has precinct committeemen on the ballot, that also has a school bond on the ballot, or whatever. The poll workers have to be trained well enough that they know, okay, the poll book says that you get this ballot. Let's make sure you get that ballot. It's your proper precinct, your proper party. Republican primary is closed. You have to be affiliated Republican to vote in it. The Democrat primary is not. You can just request a Democrat ballot, but you can't have both, obviously. And then, once you do, you run it through the scanner, and it scans. And so it is a complicated process, but with proper equipment and training, errors should be minimized. And if errors do occur, they should be mitigated. If something, there's contingencies just in case things go wrong. So the question when you look across the country at all these election integrity issues is, one, are they spending enough time and energy making sure to, the errors aren't going to happen because they have competent people in place who are honest and trustworthy and using equipment that is, open and transparent as to how it works. And then when errors do occur, are they making good faith efforts to fix them, or are they, just assuming that it's going to help their side and ignoring it? I'm thinking of all what happened in Maricopa County in 2022, those long lines and those broken machines.
Well, this is what we're trying to avoid. So this morning, Representative Alfieri had the chance to pass a bill that would help set up a election crimes and security division or unit or just person in the AG's office, working out of there, so that when these things come up, we're not playing catch up. We're letting the Secretary of State run the election, right? Set everything up, make it sure it's properly, and then having our own AG office, if a crime or an accusation or something suspicious is happening, that they can come in and say, okay, what is everybody doing here from top to bottom? And that bill we saw that come this morning, I think we have that vote total. There it is, 34-36. So once again, the Democrats who I don't know where their mind is when it comes to this election stuff. It's like all of a sudden they used to be the biggest proponents of trying to have secure elections, and then all of a sudden they don't want to do anything that has to deal with elections other than make everything mail-in ballots and whatnot. But I digress. But here's the vote total: 34-36, and this bill fails. I mean, what's your take on here? What is going on?
Well, there were some questions about the bill. Should The Florida bill that Representative Alfieri based this on actually has the Office of Election Crimes within the Secretary of State's office, and so the Secretary of State here asked why not do it this way, and he had a good response. He said if a bank gets robbed, you don't call the bank manager to investigate and prosecute, you call the police. And so you need, and Representative Tanner, my representative, made a good point in debate that it's good to have an outside agency have oversight. However, I guess a lot of people weren't convinced by that, and we get this vote. It's what's really weird to me. If you look at that vote, the people who voted against an Office of Election Crimes in the Attorney General's office are also the same people who vote against getting rid of obscene materials out of libraries. It's weird how these factions just work out, and they end up sticking together over things that have nothing to do with each other. It almost is like it is factional rather than actually on the merits.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is why elections are so important. And especially May 21st here in Idaho, the primary election is very important because, you flip a few of those seats on the 36 side and things can move even more quickly. And on the Senate side, the Senate side is even more important as we've seen how bills just die over there. So,
well, I heard that the vote to replace Senator Winder as pro tem last time was very, very close, maybe even just one vote. So that's how close conservatives were to, not necessarily having somebody of the Scott Herndon level as pro tem, but somebody who is much more conservative and open to working with conservatives than Senator Winder has been. And so imagine how things would have been different if that one vote had gone differently. And that's why every seat is important. Every primary is important. Is this person you're looking at in the Republican primary in your district? Are they going to vote for more big government, more government overreach, more establishment, go along to get along, or are they going to upset the apple cart by standing for conservative principles?
Right. All right, Brian. Well, we're running out of time here. Let everybody know where we can find you and connect with you and keep in tabs. We've got it scrolling at the bottom, but I always like to have you say it.
Yeah, follow me at Gem State Brian on Twitter or X. Subscribe at gemstate.substack.com and see all my work and more at gemstatechronicle.com, in addition to the new primary pulse, where I am putting up profiles of every candidate in the Republican legislative primary. I'm working on the Senate right now. I finished the House the other night. And so you can see them, compare them, and make a good decision.
Fantastic. All right, Brian, thanks for hanging out with me for half the show today. That was awesome. I know the viewers really enjoyed it. I got a call yesterday from somebody who says, I watch Idaho Signal all the time, and then I only read Brian Ullman. So we're killing it out there, Brian. Good work. We'll see you next time. All right, guys, we're running up on the end of the program here. I want to thank you for joining us. Head over to idahosignal.com if you want to support the show or send us a brief message and tell us how awesome we're doing over here. Thank you for watching over on X, on Rumble, YouTube, and Telegram. Your comments and your support is greatly appreciated. This is the final week, folks. We'll see what happens after this week if they need to continue, but we're running into our few final episodes of the session. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow. Take care.
This bill, I think, it puts a stake in the ground that says we have a sovereign right to protect what's ours.